going to go through and look at timelines, some of the abbreviations that we will use for timelines, and just different ways to look at the dates on a timeline, where they should be, how we can use a timeline to compare dates of when things happened and things of that nature. So the first thing that we need to look at is BC, BCE, AD, and CE. As you can see, the first question on your do now says, list the abbreviations used to identify the year on a timeline. Those abbreviations will be BC and AD, and BC or CE, as you can see highlighted there in the green. You also have, for question number 2, identify what each of those abbreviations means. We've already got here in blue that BC is before Christ, BC is before Common Era, and the reason those are highlighted in blue together is because they mean the same thing. As you'll see in just a little bit when we look at a timeline, the starting point for our timeline is the birth of Jesus. So before Christ and before Common Era both refer to the time before Jesus' birth. Anno Domini, which is AD, and CE, which means Common Era, both refer to any time being mentioned that is after the birth of Jesus. Okay, and then our third question down here, explain the purpose of using Circa. We would use Circa anytime when we're not sure of a date. We're referring to our birth date. We know for sure that is this date of this year. Not much question about that. Say we're talking about the birth of a pet, or maybe it's the birth of someone from a long time ago and we don't have really good records of it. Circa would be used to just let everyone know who is looking at our timeline. We're not real sure. We have a pretty good idea. We have maybe some documentation leading us to believe that it was in this year, but we do not have a set in stone definite date. So Circa, or just a C or CA with a period behind it, that this is an abbreviation, or sorry, not an abbreviation. C and CA are the abbreviation. That Circa is an approximation to let us know that it happened somewhere around this time. We may not be exactly sure, but we have a decent idea, and that's what we would use to indicate that. So I'll go ahead and highlight this here for you so that you can see that. And that is, as I said, the abbreviation for Circa. Okay, so that pretty well covers BC, AD, CE, BCE, Circa, all of that. You can always refer back to your reading. Everyone should have a copy of this, whether it's on paper or within your virtual class notebook in Teams. All right. So the next thing that I want to do is look at a timeline. So we're going to make our own timeline here. Put just a few dates on here just to show how this will work. So let's say we can come over here and let's just start with birthday on the timeline. Wilson's birth in 1992. Move that up to where you can see it. And then just to give us a good endpoint here, we'll go to coronavirus pandemic, which obviously, since we're dealing with virtual classrooms and all of that, we can say for sure happened in 2020. Okay? So then you could put anything you want to within this timeline, as long as it happens between 1992 and 2020. So I'll give you just a second just to kind of think, what could we put on that timeline? All right. Hopefully you have come up with something. I'm sure most of you could put your birthday on this timeline. But we could come over here. And say St. Louis Rams win the Super Bowl. We still need another event, and this one obviously has to come between 2000 and 2020. So just throw, some of you may not know what this is, but you'll learn about it in later social studies classes, I'm sure. Happened in 2016 Brexit, so we can put that there on the timeline. And now we have officially made a timeline. All right, so we'll go up here and we'll flip over to a new page. Gonna make another timeline just to show you a few more things here. Can put our starting point here. I'll throw in a text box here, birth of Jesus. Which we'll refer to as 1 AD. They didn't make a number 0 when they were making the calendar, because that idea had not reached most of your European areas. That was still more of a Eastern idea, the number 0. So we have the birth of Jesus, and then we'll come in and we'll put a couple of points on our number line, or timeline rather. Sorry. So as we're working through this is going to work similar to a number line. Since I said that, we'll go let's just do this. We'll go 400. Obviously has to be BC because it comes before the birth of Jesus on the timeline. So then this one is 200. BC or BCE. Remember, you can use either of those: before Christ, before Common Era. And then the birth of Jesus would be 1 AD or CE, however you want to put that. So we'll come over here and we'll do 200 CE / AD. And then this would be your 400 CE or AD. Okay, so as you notice on the timeline, as you're moving away from year one, moving away from the birth of Jesus, which is our reference point for Common Era and before Common Era, your numbers increase. So this is saying that this event happened 200 years after the birth of Jesus. Having BC or BCE tells us that this event happened 200 years before the birth of Jesus. So it is important, especially when you're working around this time frame, that you include BC, BCE, AD, or CE. If you don't do that, then we don't know for sure which side of the timeline we should be working on. All right, a few other things that we need to look at here really quickly are some of our words that tell us specific amounts of time. So we're going to look at a decade here, which simply means 10 years. Then we have a century, is 100 years. All right, so if we're talking about a time period that lasted exactly 10 years, or we're talking about something that happened exactly 10 years after something else, then we could use the word decade. If you're talking about 100 years, you can use century. If you're talking about a millennium, that is 1,000 years. So when we're referring to a century, the first century obviously would have had to been year 1 AD, because we're talking about the first 100 years after the birth of Jesus. So 1 AD through 99 AD. Okay. So that would mean that when we're talking about, say, the 19th century, would have actually happened 1800 to 1899. That would be the 19th century. Okay. It is important to know that because we'll talk about a lot of that as we go through the different areas of the world that we're going to discuss this year. All right, so now we have looked at the abbreviations for a timeline. We know that circa means approximately. AD is Anno Domini, or after the birth of Jesus, in the year of the Lord. CE is Common Era, which is that same time period. BC is before Christ. BCE is before Common Era. Decades, 10 years. Century is 100 years. A millennium is 1,000 years. So that pretty much walks us through how to look at a timeline, the different vocabulary and abbreviations that we will have to use when looking at a timeline. So when we move into our next lesson, which is going to be the Paleolithic Age, it's important to know that when we use the word age or era, that it's not a specific number of years. And instead, the word age or era refers to time where there was some common point of interest. So, for example, your Iron Age and tools and weapons were made of iron. So the Stone Age would be when things were made of stone, Bronze Age, things made of bronze, and so forth and so on. Paleolithic, we're going to refer to the old Stone Age. So you have in your paper and pencil packets different topics, different readings that you can look at specific to time. You have in your class notebook, if you're a virtual student, those different readings